Pipeline politics landed with a bang this week in Calgary. Mark Carney and Danielle Smith agreeing to an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, to build a pipeline from Alberta to the West Coast. To help break it all down, what it means, where this story could go from here, Sean Speer is on the roundtable. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Hey, great to connect with you, Rudyard. You said break it down, and in the 24 hours or so after this MOU has been released, I think the idea of breaking it down is important because there's the kind of top line atmospherics, there's the political dynamics, which of course are significant, but this is a highly complex deal with lots of different provisions and rules and commitments. And 24 hours later, I find myself struggling to kind of make sense of it all. I don't know how you're feeling.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's start with the politics because that's the juicy bit today, Friday morning, the 28th of November, as we record. Mark Carney receiving a standing ovation yesterday at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. Danielle Smith with a Cheshire cat grin from cheek to cheek. Clearly, the two big political winners of the week. Let's talk about them, but let's also talk about maybe some of the politicians challenged by this. BC Premier Eby, and of course, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, you have to start with Carney and Premier Smith. I think both of them are feeling pretty good today, Rudyard. You mentioned that the Prime Minister had a pretty strong standing or strong reaction at his event yesterday in Calgary. There's been an attempt to try to understand who he is and how he stands vis-a-vis the Trudeau government in Alberta, trying to make sense of is this a same old, or if there's something new here. And I think there's a sense in Alberta that this is significant, that repealing or committing to step back on a lot of Trudeau-era policies and commit in pretty strong language the need to further develop Alberta's oil and gas resources is meaningful. Similarly for Premier Smith, she is, I think, taken some heat from some parts of her base for resisting the urge to kind of punch the Prime Minister in the nose, I think, as we talked about last week, all in the name of hopefully getting to some type of deal like the one yesterday. And if you think about it, she set out a series of expectations after part of the Prime Minister was elected in terms of repealing the emissions cap, moving off the clean electricity regulations, tanker ban, etc. And I think she can show up at her party convention starting today and say she won. And so, yeah, I think a big week in federal politics and good week, I think it's fair to say, for the Prime Minister and for the Alberta Premier.
Let's focus a little bit more on the Prime Minister, because it is interesting to think how far and how fast he has remodeled the Liberal Party of Justin Trudeau. He scrapped the carbon tax. He introduced a generous, maybe somewhat unaffordable middle-class tax cut. For those of you listening, not watching online, I put that in air quotes. He's done bail reform. He's pursued, partially towards increased free trade within Canada. And now he's announced his government's support for a major pipeline from Alberta through British Columbia to Tidewater on the West Coast. Sean, is this guy a liberal?
It is really something, Rudyard. I would add to that list getting rid of the capital gains tax increase, cutting the growth of immigration, reversing other Trudeau-era climate policies, including at least slowing down the EV mandate. I had this feeling yesterday, Rudyard, what was the past 10 years all for? If you think about it, within several months, it seems like the Trudeau era was almost a mirage, a dream. A lot of its key provisions have been undone. not by its political opponent, but by the leader of their own party, with a cabinet comprised of many of the people who had a front row seats to the implementation of those policies. I said on the Hub Politics, Roger, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I owe our audience a bit of a mea culpa. I've operated with the assumption for the past several years that something fundamentally changed in the world of big L liberal politics in and around 2013, 2014. Call it the Obama factor, call it, the influence of the famous show The West Wing, whatever it was, that the Liberal Party was less ruthlessly pragmatic and more idealistically ideological. And that the Trudeau-era marked this change in the party as we understood it for the previous almost 150 years of Canadian history. And what I've been reminded, I think what a lot of people have been reminded in the past several months is this is still a political machine, a machine that finds its bearings in kind of the center of our political landscape, and is best placed in a lot of ways to be responsive to these big changes in our politics because they operate without the kind of dogmatism that some of the other parties do.
Sean,
and so in that
challenge you a little bit on that, because is it really the Liberal Party or is it the personality of Mark Carney? And in effect, has the Liberal Party simply transferred personality cults from Justin Trudeau to Mark Carney? And what we see here in terms of this remarkable set of policies that would, I think happily fall within the ambit of a Erin O'Toole prime ministership of Canada, certainly within a Jean Charest prime ministership of Canada if he had won the Liberal leadership. I would say largely within the prime ministership of a Brian Mulroney and what you might expect, again, from a bygone age of conservatism with different priorities and ideas and factors and forces. But nonetheless, everything that Mark Carney has done, you could argue, could and should and would have been sympathetic with a Harper prime ministership, of which you were part of in Ottawa. So I think it's a little bit more fundamental than, and for me, it's a known unknown whether the Liberal Party itself has changed into something. To me, it's more the remarkable ability of Mark Carney to form and shape this party into his image. And his image, to me, is decidedly, I don't know what I would call it, progressive conservative, maybe. It's not liberal. It's not liberal in the context of anything we've known for the last decade, Sean. What do you think of that analysis?
Yeah, I agree with that very much, but I don't think it's in contrast with what I said. In some ways, the fact that the Liberals have acquiesced to this significant change in the party's center of gravity without a lot of resistance, maybe with the exception of Stephen Guilbeault's resignation yesterday, is just a sign that I think that liberal politics is much more, as I say, ruthlessly pragmatic than I understood. That the same people can be out defending the agenda of Justin Trudeau and out defending the agenda of Mark Carney may, as you say, be a reflection of a cult of personality. But the fact that they enable themselves to follow these different cults is a sign of a political machine that is less ideologically progressive in its kind of DNA than I had come to understand.
Yeah. Again, I just look at this a little bit differently. I tilt the glass, 45 degrees. I just don't see this as necessarily the party following Mark Carney. I see this as Mark Carney is the party. He is the alpha and the omega. There is, and this we know is a reflection of what's happened to political parties, especially centrist parties across the Western world. They've turned into empty vessels. They are simply leadership vehicles for the personalities and proclivities and preferences of a singular individual, in this case, Mark Carney. I guess what I want to throw back to you is if you accept the contention that Mark Carney is a liberal in name only, and you and I know the history and the backstory that Mark Carney, at an earlier point, a decade or more ago, had conversations and led certain people in the conservative movement in Canada to understand that he might consider back then have become to have wanted to become the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, possibly to succeed Stephen Harper. That didn't happen for a whole series of reasons. Maybe it would never have happened. Maybe he was always inclined more towards the Liberal Party. But the result is we arrive today in 2025, Sean, with a prime minister who I really do think is a Liberal in name only, who is doing things across the board. This week, he talked about how Canada's foreign policy would not be shaped by, gender prerogatives. I mean, this would be heresy in Liberal land, as recently as 24 months ago. Do we have a Conservative Prime Minister of Canada, Sean?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? It probably devolves into a complicated conversation about the kind of evolution of conservatism itself. Because, as you say, it wasn't that long ago that Mark Carney's temperament, the kind of his persona, even his presentation, would have felt fit comfortably within a conservative party, to say nothing of his broader policy agenda. I think what's changed, and what probably makes Carney a bad fit for modern conservative politics, and I suspect that's part of what caused him to not pursue those discussions, a decade or longer ago now, is that the Conservative Party, as you know, Rudyard, we've talked a lot about this over the past several years, has become more downscale, more populist, not as animated by an economic agenda, motivated in part by concerns around culture and identity and all the rest. And I think it's on those issues where Prime Minister Carney departs or diverges from conservative politics. And probably, to be honest, Rudyard, what enables him to push the Liberal Party up against maybe people's comfort levels on environment and economic and fiscal policy and so on, but at the same time acquiesce to him that on those types of issues, Indigenous issues around human sexuality and so on, Mark Carney is still lined up along how center left Canadians are thinking. But before I come back to you, I just want to make one point, because the person we haven't talked about yet is Pierre Poilievre, and so all this stuff isn't happening in a vacuum. The moves that Carney has made, including in the past 24 hours or so in this MOU, is putting Pierre Poilievre in a difficult spot. The Prime Minister has just signed a huge deal with the Premier of Alberta, who represents a province that, incidentally, Pierre Poilievre currently does as an Alberta Member of Parliament. And you saw the federal Conservatives in a really uncomfortable position yesterday of, on one hand, criticizing aspects of the deal, but on the other hand, not wanting getting too far offside Premier Smith, right? Or the risk is she actually comes out and has to distance herself from the federal party. So there is a kind of bit of triangulation going on here. In some ways, a political archetype for what Mark Carney is doing is maybe Bill Clinton in the 1990s, where he had kind of standing on his on the kind of center left of his party, and in so doing was able to move to the right on different issues, and as a result put his political opponents in a really difficult position.
Again, I'll let sleeping dogs lie, but I don't know. I struggle to think of one thing that Mark Carney has done to really show his center left bona fides since he's become prime minister.
Well,
I mean, he's talked
recognizing the state of Palestine would be the top one.
Okay, I'll give you that one. But he's talked about Canadian identity as a tripartite structure of English, French, and First Nations. That is a very traditional fact. You'd go back again to Stephen Harper or other Conservative prime ministers to look for similar kind of configurations of what Canada's identity is. As you say, he's got rid of the EV mandate. He's scrapped the carbon tax. If you put into one column all the things that he's done that, in a sense, show what I would say is a more kind of traditional, less populist, albeit, I agree, out of sync with certainly the United States and the direction of conservative politics there. But in Canada, we haven't crossed the populist Rubicon. There's still large number of conservative voters who don't look favorably on Donald Trump, who aren't interested in populism, who are interested in much more in a more conventional, conservative offering and product from their leader, which many of them feel they're not getting now. But boy, Sean, they are getting that from Mark Carney. And I guess that just brings me to my final point. I want to talk to you before we break with our complimentary viewers and listeners. We're going to get into the back half of the show, the kind of more of the details of this MOU and will this pipeline ever get built. But just to end this portion of the show, Sean, what does this mean for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party at this moment if their primary opponent, Mark Carney, has in a sense commanded the broad center of Canadian politics at this moment? And it may not last, but seems and I agree with you, seems to have been able to extract a social license from the center-left elements in his party to do what he is doing, which is to reach and move himself out of the center increasingly into what would be traditional center-right policy thinking and ideas, like a bitumen pipeline from Alberta to Tidewater in BC. Where does the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre go in that circumstance? What is the strategy and the tactic when your opponent is basically running the boards on you in a terrain you can't fight on, which is center-left, but has now invaded your political territory and is taking numbers on a whole series of policy priorities and preferences that stretch well into the center-right?
Yeah. So here we're in complete agreement that I think this represents a real threat to Poilievre and the Conservatives, precisely because, Rudyard, they are inclined to find what you might characterize as wedge issues where there's clear differentiation from the Liberals. That was hugely valuable for Pierre Poilievre in the last Parliament. But as you say, on a growing number of issues, Mark Carney has essentially eliminated daylight between him and the Conservatives, increased defense spending, lower middle-income taxes, get rid of the carbon tax, get
lower
rid of
immigration
the mandate, lower the growth of immigration, et cetera, et cetera. And I worry that pushes the Conservatives in search of issues of differentiation into terrain, Rudyard, where they may differentiate themselves from the Liberals, but not in a way that's favorable. Pierre Poilievre has experimented, as you know, with the idea of essentially eliminating population growth for the foreseeable future. So pushing immigration levels down even lower than the Carney government has proposed, and just on a bunch of other issues or intimations, you do get the sense that the party finds itself backed into a corner, and this is a conversation that's happening in real time. We've published some articles, included by me and others, that reflects a kind of intramural discussion amongst conservatives about this precise risk, that there is a growing number of people, particularly young conservatives, who think, in light of Mark Carney's economic and fiscal agenda, one, as I say, that by and large eliminates daylight with the Conservatives, that this is a sign that Conservatives ought to go kind of scorched earth on cultural and social issues. And one can debate the kind of substance of those issues, but as a matter of politics, that just strikes me as a loser. And so in that sense, we end the week with Mark Carney feeling pretty good about where he stands, and Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives increasingly on kind of a shaky foundation, struggling to find their voice in the issues where they can kind of try to regain control of the agenda.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would just say it's maybe not even just shaky foundations. It's just like a shrinking political terrain, like a redoubt, as you'd say in, World War I battle parlance. Like they don't have a lot of room to maneuver. They've been pushed, as you say, out towards fringier issues and topics and ideas where Mark Carney, I'm sure, doesn't want to go because there aren't a lot of voters there. It doesn't make sense for him to go there. But he's managed, especially through this pipeline decision this week, I think, to really encroach into the consciousness of conservatives. I think if there was an election today, Sean, he would pick up a surprising number of seats in Alberta, in Calgary, and at Edmonton, and maybe he'd lose some seats in BC. I don't know, but he's doing things here that are surprisingly bold for a central banker, and it gives me a sense that he is using the power of incumbency, his position as prime minister, and everything that comes with that, to really rework the battle lines of not just political debate but political ideology in the country. And Canada, I don't know, historically rewards leaders that can straddle like that and can assume a policy mix across the board. My final point would be just, this may be pitch perfect. This may be the high watermark. The NDP don't have a new leader. There may be stronger and more different preferences that emerge on a center left. I see that, Sean, I'll give you the last word, as likely the only way that the Conservatives can, in a sense, claw their way back into a greater share of center-right mind space. Mark Carney needs to be challenged from his left, and it just ain't happening. Guilbeault resigning is a kind of nothing burger.
Yeah, I agree with that a million percent. I have nothing to add on that specific point. But as we wrap up this segment, if I could make one separate, slightly unrelated point, Rudyard, if there was like a kind of thesis to the roundtable and a lot of the work we do at the Hub, is that we've wanted our politicians to be more ambitious, to be less transactional, to be more macro, to be more responsive and proportionate to the challenges facing the country. I think we see that, maybe not. We'll talk on the back half about some particular details that may not be great, but at a big picture level, I think this agreement nods in that direction. And we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize the week that Premier Smith had. Like, she started the week, Rudyard, by tabling the most ambitious healthcare reform in the kind of modern history of Canadian healthcare, and ends the week securing major concessions from the federal government on signature climate policies under the Trudeau government. I concede that when Jason Kenney stepped down as leader, I was a bit doubtful of Premier Smith. You recall in a previous iteration, as a political leader, she had her challenges. But credit where credit's due. This has been one of the most impressive weeks of a politician that I can think of in a long time. She will rightfully go into the convention this weekend with the wind at her back, and she certainly deserves it.
Yeah, well said. Well, let's say goodbye to our complimentary listeners and viewers. If you want to join Sean and me on the back half of the program, head over to www.thehub.ca. Grab yourself a Hub Hero membership. Only $2 a week. It's got to be the best deal in town. You get all of our premium podcasts, including this one, and In Conversation with David Frum, plus all of our premium content on our website, and an all events pass for one. We got a terrific debate on immigration in Ottawa coming up December 9th. You can check that out on our website too. All kinds of great stuff going on at the Hub. Be part of our community and join us on the back half of the roundtable now.